two of my tremendous colleagues, Heather and Mallori, that we're going to be speaking about challenges that we have faced, what we have experienced in the last few years. We want to go over some specific points, some best practices. We're going to get into that in a little bit more detail. But I want to just give you a little bit of information about Mallori and Heather. Mallori is a newly registered architect. I say newly, within the year, right?
A year ago.
Practiced architecture. She decided, much like me, that she wanted to get out of architecture and get in the development business. She picked senior living. We're very happy about that. Heather, been with us for several years. Heather's a civil engineer. Her, I think, claim to fame is that she built all of 635 up there north of Dallas. But very talented. Both of these colleagues of mine are just wonderful to work with. I really enjoy working with them. So really what we're going to be talking about is this cost environment that we've experienced, particularly since really it was after the Great Recession. We saw steady increases in cost. They were manageable, somewhat predictable. The pandemic came, changed a lot of stuff for us. We'll get into some of that. We want to talk about, as I said before, some best practices about what to do in this environment that we find ourselves in. Both Heather and Mallori work in our group in pre-finance, the design, the pricing, in addition to the construction when we're in construction administration. We want to talk about, the importance of each one of those phases of the project. And I will make a couple of comments about land and land acquisition because it obviously can affect the timeline on any project a lot. So let's move forward. So from the ground up, I intentionally have this slide with all of these images because I want to kind of tee up the fact that each one of these projects were started really within the last 5-6 years. So it's gone through a pretty long process from planning until financing and or construction. And also you can see there's an image there that was shown yesterday by Alan. It's the beginning of a master plan. So here's a project that we're just starting to look at. It's going to take a while. We want to start trying to be as predictive as we can about the timeline and what the costs are going to be. We've seen challenges in the past. I think this time frame is a little bit unusual. But every project that we work on it's got its challenges. Even in the best of times, there's challenges because just the way these things are put together. We're always interested in the aspect of the time and the money involved in the project. As I said before, most recently, it's the pandemic and the outcome and the stuff that's happened since then. I am going to indicate and show a couple of slides. I'm not real big on these kind of slides, but it's important with maybe 2 or 3 slides to a little back history of what we've experienced. And you can see that really since January 2011, all costs and all levels of care have been increasing. Where the drop is in that March, May of 2020, prices went down just because work was slowing down. And then whenever the stimulus hit, off they go again. And a lot of that had to do with supply chain, and I think a whole lot of it had to do with labor force. So again, I don't want to bore you with a lot of that stuff, but you can see it if you can read the chart on the far left. Those are $50 a foot increments. This is actually a graphic from the White's company. They track these costs and they blend each one of these levels of care basically in 3 categories. So it's not specific. They may say, well, we have one product in independent living that we would consider a moderate level of finish, and then something that would be a much higher level of finish. Well, they take those numbers and they blend them together. They produce these kind of graphs. So it's good to track kind of what's happening in general, but you can't really use this kind of information to predict and look at what costs may be today. The other thing that we really like to look at, or at least I do, is commodities. And you can see these are increases since April of 2020 up till February of 22. Everybody is familiar with the lumber. You can see what those increases are. And then now fuel costs because of the cost of oil, right? We're all experiencing it at the gas pumps right now. JIP products, people have had issues acquiring that. Christy had mentioned appliances. Well, quite frankly, appliances aren't so bad right now. It's going to be something else. Ordering trusses is an example. 12-month lead time. Bert's dealing with that right now in a project. And there's tactics that you can use to kind of soften what that impact would be. We can maybe mention that in a little bit. But the supply chain and the material availability is what has, I think, been the most, how should I say, unpredictable to a degree, because it's just, you just can't be sure of when you're going to get some material when you have ordered it. Here's a chart. This is one I look at every Thursday, quite frankly. It's from IDAPAC. This one goes back, I didn't get the most recent one, but you can see June 2nd. And just look at that from, July of 2021 and before, it was tremendously high, and then it bottomed out. We went a few months back up. Anybody that's been trying to buy or build something right now has experienced that. You can see right now that when you look at the charts, there's basically three boxes, right? So in the middle is a composite number, and that's really just merging or blending the OSB, which is oriented strand board, and then the dimensional lumber that's on the left. I was reading a report, and I haven't had time yet to check it, but they were saying right now that the composite's running around $825, $28 per thousand, and they're predicting that it'll go down to about $545. I'll bet you by next week it'll probably be there, but who knows? These are the guys that are experts supposed to predict this. These are the kind of things that we want to use to be able to predict where material pricing may go. But more importantly, it's really our consultants, our pre-construction consultants, that have probably a lot more information. They have a lot more real-time discussions with material suppliers and subcontractors, et cetera, to help us put pricing together. You all have all been down the road where, because the time when we start conceptualizing a project until you get to actual financing can sometimes fluctuate in the time for multiple reasons. And all along that path, we're trying to predict where the pricing may be 12, 18, 20 months away. You got to have some really good consultants to do that work. You got to be able to be on top of where the pricing and the labor is as you go down that path. And these are just some of the tools that we'd be using. Here's a chart that basically talks about new hires. You can see, throughout the previous years, things up and down, but it's really in 2021 you can start to see the shift. There's more opportunities, but not as many people in the trades that can execute on the work. And I believe that's one of the biggest impactors right now is labor. So we talked about the commodities, the fuel, supply chain, labor shortages is indicated here. I do want to make mention about land, the horizontal aspect of our projects, and the time that it takes potentially to get approvals for a repositioning. Maybe you're buying a new piece of land and it's got to have some zoning or site plan approval. Those things seem to be these days getting longer and longer to accomplish. So getting the work started early, working the schedules to try to get to that point where you can have the approvals go full bore on a real design is very important from a time standpoint. And I do believe that time is really the most important risk item. The cost of materials, the escalation, the labor, although it fluctuates with good consulting, I believe it's predictable and manageable. It's the time that is probably the riskiest, particularly when it comes to construction in this environment because of supply chain, labor shortages, et cetera. So in order to alleviate that, great consultants, great reporting, et cetera, is really what needs to happen. So anybody know what this is? A picture of? What year? This is actually Johnny Cash's Cadillac they called Patches. It came, I guess, from the song One Piece at a Time, right? If you guys remember that. It's actually parts from 1949 to 1970. I brought this up because I wanted to have some sort of graphic that represents that every project we do is custom. There's not one of them that is really the same. Yeah, they have cabinets, they got sinks, they got showers, but the space programs are all different. The market demands are all different. The financial aspects and needs are all different. So it can get a little bit complicated when it comes to pulling one of these deals together and planning for it, particularly over that amount of time. 21 years, there's a joke about the title is probably 20 pages long because it's got 21 years of parts in this car. I've never worked on a project that took 21 years to complete. Well, except for my house that I designed, and I probably worked on it off and on for 21 years with my wife, changing things, remodeling things, adding things, etc. But that's the only project where I've had that kind of involvement. One of the things that Mark had alluded to or mentioned was the concept of anticipating the puck. This is something very important to us. We talk about it in the development group all the time. Particular project, particular issues, talk about, well, what is it that you and your consultant team are visualizing to be pressure points? And then anticipate how you might deal with that. So if and when the time comes, you're prepared to make certain decisions and move on. I will say that I mentioned the aspect of the team building, hugely important. One of the most important things in the team building, you got architects, contractors that act as pre-con, you got developers, civil engineer, interior designers, excuse me, on and on. But I believe one of the most important team members is the owner and the sponsor. And their involvement in this process to be able to make quick decisions and be able to adapt to things that come up, be flexible. Because right now, that's going to always be the case. Christy mentioned the appliances. Well, maybe you can't get this brand of appliance or it's delayed, but if you can get a different one, a different manufacturer, or a different product, whatever it may be, boom, make a decision quickly and you can move on. So I think that that's hugely important. A great example of it is this man here, Eric, with JK8V. Be able to make a quick decision when something pops up, move on with the contractor, no delays, waiting on things to happen. The other thing is the architect and their ability, and it's one of the things you need to be dealing with in smart contracts. Shorten the time required by the architect to respond to requests for information or submittals, that kind of thing. If it's the normal 2 weeks, when it might be 3 days, there's a huge compression of time to move on with your project. So something to consider. Team experience. I mentioned the importance of being flexible and adaptive. There's other concepts about that from a design standpoint and from the construction administration that Heather and Mallori will talk about here in a few minutes. The other thing I want to just mention is this notion of being as tight with your programming, make things as small as you can, but make them fashionably smaller, and move on with your project. Mallori and Heather, we're going to get into more of those kind of details. I'm going to turn it over to Mallori now, and she can go into, I think, more design components.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bud.
You're welcome.
So I will be going into more of the design side, really looking at, I think Bud kind of set the mood as far as kind of a sad mood here as far as what we're going through. We're kind of going to lighten it up as far as what we can actually do to combat these issues. Specifically on the design side, I'll be going through some considerations and tactics that we can use. So I'll go through some space planning and how we can look at the design of spaces. Also looking at possible off-site construction and how the design can start to coordinate with that off-site construction components. And then looking at the team dynamics and how we can evaluate alternates throughout the process from design and through construction. So when I think of a space that really needs to do a lot, I think of multi-use. And when I think of multi-use, I think of a Swiss Army knife. I think of a space that needs to clip our nails, a space that needs to open our newest Amazon package, a space that needs to open our favorite bottle of wine. We need our spaces to do more. When we have a lot of space that is not purposeful, then we are creating space not only through the design, but also in the construction that's going to cost time and money. So we need to start thinking about these spaces that can do more for us and how we can take advantage of the space that we already have. So that brings us to multi-purpose spaces. Everyone knows about a multi-purpose space. We're in one right now, but maybe you don't know about the strategies and what we need to do to make sure that those spaces are designed well and that they can be utilized effectively. So looking at a couple of those strategies, we want to make sure that the lighting is well distributed. We want to make sure that we have lighting that can be utilized and changed for different events. You might have a movie night, you might have a big conference, or you might have a fitness activity. You might need to think about how you're going to implement the lighting and how it can change over the course of the day, but also the course of the lifetime of your project. Next, you want to look at flooring. You want to make sure that your flooring is durable. You want to make sure that the flooring can pass the test of time. You're going to be thinking about moving furniture in and out of these spaces. People could be dancing here. They could be doing a Zumba class in these multi-purpose spaces. And of course, like I said, the furniture. Those carts are really hard on these floors. You need to think about the product that you're putting down and thinking about when you're talking with your architects and your designers, making sure that that is probably where you're going to invest some more money in these multi-purpose spaces. Also looking at partitions. So partitions can be really critical to these spaces. Being able to divide the spaces into smaller, more intimate settings and really allowing a different event to happen, whether that is a small meeting or a Zumba class, maybe just not at the same time, but making sure that you have those ability to break it down, whether you need a full-size room like this, or you can see even in this room that you can divide this into 3 separate rooms depending on what that event might be. One of the most important pieces is going to be storage. You don't want to forget storage when you think about your multi-purpose space. And I see some people laughing because I'm sure many of y'all have been in a space where you have all these tables and chairs and you have nowhere to put them. And they're going to be against the side wall. They're not going to be able to be fully, you're not going to be able to utilize the space to its full potential if you don't have a storage space to put them in. So when you're working with your architects, you want to make sure that programming and the operations, the marketing team is all on board with how these spaces will be used so that the design team has the information to make sure those spaces are large enough to store all the things that you have. It's going to require carts, and maybe if you are doing any kind of fitness programs, maybe it's even more shelving than you thought. You're going to be storing yoga mats or different equipment, maybe small weights. It's going to be more than what might have previously had been planned for these spaces. And then lastly, you want to think about technology. You really want to make sure that we have top technology in these areas so that they can transform over time and that we can really utilize these spaces to their highest capacity. And even if you're not implementing or putting all of those pieces in right now, having the backbones set for those spaces so that you can start to add those different pieces of technology as you're able is going to be critical in those spaces so that they can be utilized for a long time. And then again, operations and marketing being involved early, having that team together and making sure that we're all talking together and that you are making sure you're communicating your vision for the space and how it will be used is going to be critical so that we make sure that the ease of operations of these spaces can actually happen. So thinking about other ways to utilize good space, this picture might look a little, well, that's a school hallway, right? It has a nice skylight, but other than that, not so great. In reality, this didn't have a light at all. So this is a space, when you start thinking about the interior spaces of your projects, a lot of times that's going to be the back of house. That's going to be the laundry room, that's going to be the back of house storage, possibly even a staff space that's not so great. Looking at creative products, and this is actually a product called Light Glass. This is not a light or a window, or it is a light, it's not a window. So this is a light that's put in place. It can mimic daylight from day to night, and it starts to make these interior spaces more usable so that you can start to utilize these interior spaces, especially in those, I'd say, renovation type projects where you're kind of stuck to your box. So you don't have all this extra space to play with. Thinking about these creative solutions and working with your design team to come up with the next generation of solutions for your project is going to be critical. And speaking of creative use of space, while we did talk a little bit about parking and the future of the automobile yesterday, we know that we will still have automobiles, but maybe there's a way that we can use less land, because land is not getting any cheaper, and it's also not getting any more, we're not getting more of it. So you want to make sure that we are using our land creatively and thinking about ways that we can look at the future of the automobile. So this might be in an automated parking system like this one, where you can save up to 20% on costs alone, just because of the land and the soft costs that you're going to save from that. And again, you're going to save that land, you're going to save on lower construction costs over the course of the time, and it starts to become more environmentally friendly because you're not having people with gas filling up a garage space, but rather a smaller, more compact area that can store more cars with less space. But maybe your resident isn't going to be ready for that automated parking system yet. So thinking about other solutions and how we can take our current parking and adapt it for the future. If we do have these self-driving cars, they're going to be able to be a lot more efficient in the parking garages we already have. We're not going to need all these large aisles. We're not going to need all this extra space where a car can park itself just perfectly without that space. So thinking about how maybe that second deck of parking could be utilized as an office, as a common space, maybe even as residences in the future, it's important to think about how those are designed today. So looking at higher vertical clearances so that you can have HVAC, you can have lighting, you can have plumbing that can go through these spaces in the future, but also looking at maybe the code. So thinking, building code is going to be different from a usable space to a parking space. Talking with your design team about what it might need, or what you might need to make that a different solution in the future. Also looking at even just the elevation, or the level. So making sure it's not ramped. You don't want to be parking on a ramped area and then thinking that that's going to be a sitting space in the future. Everyone's going to be sitting like this. That's not going to fly. So thinking about those futuristic ways. And then specifically on the screen, this is a wrap solution, which we might see more of when we have less land to work with. So this is, you'll see all the residents on the outside, and that parking garage is centered in the middle. You've probably been to some form of development that functions like this, but probably not a senior community yet. But I think that this will be coming, and thinking about that relation from the residents into that parking garage for potential common space might be a great solution. And then even talking further about those, looking at modular and thinking about adaptable common spaces, this is kind of probably like the next generation. There's actually a company called Heda that's looking at streaming spaces. So just like we stream on our Netflix, we're going to start streaming our spaces and how they get used for pop-up events, but also over the life cycle of your project. Thinking about just how the structure works specifically, and then how it can plug and play for interior, exterior space over the course of your project. So just thinking about really that next design level, and talking to your architects about how can I think about the future for this space and what technology might be out there that we want to implement now that's going to help us. And then when we think about the modular piece of really the unit, we talk about like the kit of parts. So we talk about a nominal bay. This one specifically has a 13-foot 6 bay. That's specific to really what you can take on a trailer, so it can be taken down the road. So that 13-foot 6 bay is going to be copied over. You start to have that living and dining area, and then you have the residential, that sleeping area, and it can transform. You can grow it and copy that bay over to create different design ideas. It lowers the complexity for construction, and the dollar per square foot may not be less initially, but the cost that you're going to save in time is really, again, what we're going to be focusing on. Time is huge, and allowing these products to possibly be built off-site is going to really help our construction timeline overall. When something can be built in a warehouse somewhere else, it's going to save us time and weather delays in the field. And you might think, well, that's just going to look like this. I don't want a stack of storage containers on my site. I know what modular construction is. That's not really what it is anymore. There's a lot better, more sophisticated, really great contractors that are working through these right now. So this is actually a plant in Chicago. Skinder Construction is working on these modular solutions. I believe this is specifically an apartment home, but obviously very similar to our products. On the left, you'll see the actual full warehouse where these modules are built. The middle, you see that full finished unit from the exterior. Again, very modern, clean lines, different. And then the interior, you can see it's just like our spaces that we're designing right now. It's nice, it's good finishes, it's high ceilings. There's lots of great ways to implement these off-site construction. But also, off-site construction doesn't mean that the whole building is built off-site. Maybe we're just building the walls off-site. So this is our project in Colorado Springs. It's the Aberdeen Ridge project for PMMA. I believe Pat's working on this project. And you can see on the left, you have a stack of lumber. What that actually is fully framed walls. So this is panelized construction. So you start to get a nonlinear construction process where you can build these walls off-site, bring them on, and then put them up, but you're saving all that time of actual framing. And while everyone's working on the dirt work, they can start the framing that moment. And then also, because they're going to have these technological models already in their factory working on these, you're going to start to you're going to start to anticipate those issues that probably would have come up in the field later. So you're going to see those sooner, and it's going to be overlapping with everything that's already happening. So it starts to eliminate those surprises, it's going to reduce those headaches, and it's going to mitigate the risks. And then lastly, now looking more at the team dynamic area, looking at value adjusting, or as many of us here, value engineering, typically gets a bad rap. But in reality, we're looking for best value. And right now, that doesn't always mean cost. That does mean time, a lot of the time. So we need to start thinking about looking at value adjusting differently and in a different light, and talking to our design teams about how that can be implemented better. So again, time, it can be greater than that upfront cost, and we need to make sure that our design team is able to evaluate these alternates in a timely manner, but also that our owner is able to get on board and understand what we might be going through and how that's going to change over this inflationary period. And then being able to utilize the allowances effectively, putting those in place early, making sure that the design team's on board, and understanding how those can be moved through the process is going to be critical. And then lastly, just during construction, the design team is critical. They don't stop when the design is finished. They're going to be integral in the construction process, and making sure that they are aware of the critical path. The team is important. While you see a lot of red and green in that bottom picture, that's some of these programs that we utilize for construction, but in reality, the team is the most important. There needs to be open communication, there needs to be trust, which Heather's going to talk a little bit more about, and I will go ahead and pass it on to her for construction.
Excellent. Thank you, Mallory, and welcome. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here and talk to you about what we're doing right now in the construction world and how we're mitigating these risks that relate mostly to time on our projects right now that we're going through. Personally, I have a few projects that are opening right around now, and I have a few that are opening at the beginning of the year. So we're actively going through these concerns and these challenges right now. And I'm going to high level cover contracts, how we're changing our contracts a little bit, how we're managing time, et cetera, allowances throughout during construction period, and then how we handle the closeout, because there's a lot of risks that go along with that. Contract considerations. Unfortunately, we cannot hire Chuck Norris as our contractor, but actually he is now in our age range, so maybe we can get him into one of our communities. So contract language in general is actually a positive that's come out of pandemic era, is while you're dealing with all of the time and the delivery issues and the material escalations and labor shortages, you've actually gotten a stronger contract through it. We've actually gone back through when the pandemic happened, we went back through our contracts and shored up those words a little bit. What you had previously was a act of God in the contract right now that was really ambiguous when pandemic happened. So you had a lot of questions that came up when you had shutdowns, when you had cost increases. So we've gone back and we've very shored up that language in itself and have made it very clear what happens if we have to shut down. Where does the cost go? What happens with GCs? So each contract has been much more perfected with that. Also, you have larger allowances in your guaranteed maximum price. This is largely due to more health trackers, more personnel to keep track of the pandemic on your site. And that's going to be hitting your GCs. You're also going to have larger allowances in your materials. I know that when we financed Stevenson Oaks, Methodist Retirement Community's project in Fort Worth, we had a couple $100,000 in allowances for overages in lumber. And at the time, we thought that was a good number. And then right when we hit, it was $500,000, $600,000. And because of the relationship between our contractor with Andrus and with their suppliers, they were able to work that with the supplier to get it back down to within our allowance. So we actually came in under that allowance based on the relationship with that contractor and their subs. And that kind of brings me to my next part. Make sure we've become more selective of our team members. Not just contractors, but also architects, engineers, interior designers. For contractors, we focused more on their sub-relationships, their material relationships, their local presence, and their references. We also want to make sure that they have the bonding capabilities there too. For architects, engineers, and interior designers, we want to make sure that they can pivot. Like Bud said and Mallori said, they need to make quick decisions. They need to have alternates ready. We need to be able to, instead of taking the 2-week response to submittals and RFIs, we need to do it in a few days. Because with the threat of any kind of risk in cost increases or time or availability, we need to make sure that we make those decisions on a dime. And I would also say that one more thing for the contracts that we need to consider is multiple payments within the period. So subs are going to be more incentivized to work on our project if they get paid quicker. So we need to be able to look at that financially and how that works. Another thing that's a little bit more about the allowances is pre-finance. We usually put recently and starting doing it future projects is have a 2% or more allowance within the GMP that is contractor operated and owned, but it's really the owner's sign off on it. And what we made sure in the contract is that anything that is not used in that allowance goes back to the owner in full. It is not subject to a split savings. Any of the allowances that I spoke about earlier are not subject to split savings because of the market that we're in. And most of the contractors have been very favorable about that. Once we hit financing, we go through a very clear order of events. As you see, first thing, you got your general contractor talking with the subs, identifying areas that we know that are going to have hits. Usually, it was the very first one we talked about, Alan Courier with Rockwood Retirement Communities. We used this on Whitworth project, phase 2. And we put it there primarily because we financed a few months, I think about 5-6 months ahead of starting construction on this. So we put in this allowance in there just to cover ourselves, knowing that there was going to be some inflation in that time and escalation in materials. So when we hit the ground running with actual starting construction in our early start work, we immediately started talking about lumber. And so we got into it, we talked with the subs, Walker, the contractor on that one, started talking to us about what we were gonna do as far as what's the best plan of attack. And talking with the subs, talking with Alan and his team, we decided that we were gonna buy a portion of the framing at that time at that cost and wait to see. The supplier at that time felt like it was gonna go down. And so we bought a portion of it. We had the luxury of time because we were working on the excavation and the demo of the existing building, and we were working on the parking garage at that time. So we started working on a portion of the project, and we had framing going on at that time. And then it shot up. About a month later, it doubled in price. And we went back to the supplier and go, what do we do? How do we go about this? And really leaned on them about it, and it went back down, back to before where we even did, and we did not lose any time on our schedule for that. And so what this does is at the very beginning, you start talking about your escalation that's gonna hit you. And it encourages buyout early. Walker went straight to all of their subs. Walker with Rockwood at Whitworth went all to their subs and told them, hey, guys, get it in now. Start buying it out now, because that's gonna mitigate your risk. That's gonna mitigate any cost increases. And then we had a perfect storage, which was our parking garage at that time. So we had a place to put it, but consider thinking about off-site construction, off-site storage, on-site storage to hold these materials so that you don't run into that risk. And this is the last thing on contract considerations, and I'll go pretty quickly, I'm running out of time. But this was the format that you have in the contract right now, 0 to 91 days, and this is the percentage of daily debt service per day past substantial completion contractual amount. So day 91, they're paying 100% of their daily debt service per day, and ahead of that, you're gonna go the 25, 50, 75, 100. Well, now we're seeing that we're actually giving that first 30 days 0%. And what you may think that's a free pass, but actually what we see is when you start the conversations with the contractor and you start going through the process about what the duration's gonna be, when you start taking that 30 days off and you limit their risk of liquidated damages, you actually see your duration go down. We've seen any project go down 1 to 2 months. So this is a negotiating tool that you can use as if you're willing to add this to your contract that gives a little bit of a give and take between the contractor and you guys. During construction, I'll talk about this pretty quickly, but as you can see, our allowances have gone up from 7 to 9% to 9 to 12. And that includes all of your contractor-held contingency, owner-held contingency, project-held contingency. This also includes the 2% I talked about earlier, material allowances, any kind of contingencies that relate to if we run out of time that we're holding in there. But we're still holding the same operations through the life of the project to heart. Every single week we get together, we talk about change orders. Every single month we get a change order log from our contractor, and we mitigate that risk by knowing what's coming up. I also encourage everybody on my projects to start thinking about reserves. Put on your very first day, talk about your reserve of what happens if we run into time. What about operations? Let's put some money in there for operations. Let's put in there for unforeseen conditions, and now you see kind of where you're at in your bucket as we see more change orders come in through the life of the project. And it also clears up your priorities. So if we see that come through and you see all these change orders come through and maybe some upgrades that come in, you can look at it as how healthy your contingency is at that point and make a decision from that. Time, most important thing. So look, we already talked about the choosing alternates. I won't really go into that very much, but yes, keeping your architects and your designers and even your contractors to help with this, to come up with solutions for you is imperative. And having quick decisions with that is important as well. So you need to be able to get the information from your team and your construction team as well for cost and what that material is and compare it to what is in the spec. And you have to make a decision really quick because again, we're running on time, we're running on potential cost increases. And one thing I would say is have your acceleration discussions early. The worst thing that I've seen right now, and the worst thing that in my mind could happen is you get to the very end of the project and you want to accelerate. You're 2 weeks out, your inspections have taken a little bit longer than you wanted to do, and you can't do anything about it because you don't have the people. And you have all the materials, everything's there, you're just waiting on the people and they can't get there. So what I suggest is that we go through our critical path schedule early on. And we start looking at the trades that we could potentially put another crew on, your MEP, your concrete, your lumber, and try to accelerate those. But when you do that, I would say, let's make sure that your change orders are very clear as far as what you're spending money on and a date that is set for that. Another during construction. Okay, so trust. Trust is huge. Mr. Bert Durr actually started our own little book club at the development department in Greystone, and we're reading this now for the second time. And going through it, we digest it, and then we have meetings about it, talking about it, how we can incorporate this into our daily lives and our projects. It helps with our communication, it helps with our teams, and it helps with our team within Greystone itself. So this is The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey, and basically the premise is if you trust people, everything goes faster. Your tasks go faster, your projects go faster. There's not a lot of questions as far as are they really being genuine. It's really, hey, I trust them, let's go. Let's get it documented, but let's go. And so I'll give you a minute to read this quote. I want you to focus on that last sentence. While high trust won't necessarily rescue a poor strategy, low trust will almost always derail a good one. You've seen this. Say you have a phased opening, and it's a perfect example of it in my mind. You have a phased opening, your first IL, you have 80 units, and you have punch lists, and the first punch list date goes by and you miss it. And then so they push it back a week, and then you miss the next one, and you push that back a week. You have a set amount of time in there between when they are supposed to turn it over to you contractually to when your resident's moving in. And so if they keep pushing that back, it compresses your time and adds chaos to the project and to getting those residents in, because you don't want to push back the residents if you can help it. And what happened is now you've lost trust in that contractor. Those dates that you gave me, you didn't meet them. So that next phase that comes over, you immediately start adding time. Hey, let's add a month in there instead of 2 weeks. And then you have to explain it to the residents, and their trust wavers. So you don't trust them because you don't think that they'll hit that date. You also see this trust as a problem when you're running into a challenge on the project and you all sit down and you're trying to figure out what's going on, how we got to where we are, and everyone starts pointing fingers. None of themselves, everyone else. High trust is going to be you sit down, you talk about it, you say, hey, this is where I messed up. These are my scope gaps. Can we figure this out? Let's all work on it together. And really, starting trust starts at the very beginning. It starts when you have your very first charrette. It starts when you have your deliverables and doing what you say you're going to do and hitting those timelines. And if you find yourself in a position where you're in the middle of construction and you are seeing the fingers being pointed and you are seeing them missing dates and not telling you and waiting until the end and then pointing fingers, reset. Talk with your team, sit them down, be transparent. Encourage them to be transparent too. We have to own up to any misses that we've made. That's really going to open up the conversation with your contractors and your subs. Substantial, and this is the last little bit for me. Substantial completion dates and openings. So inspections right now are also going through the exact same problems we are going through as far as labor shortages and people. So, for example, our project in Jefferson's Ferry on Long Island, we have an expediter to help with this. And her main purpose is to keep us in line for documentation, make sure that she has the experience with the town itself. For example, we had our first turnover, and the fire marshal came and said, here's my first one. It was during the holidays, and he goes, here's my first one. You got to fix this, this, this. I'll be back in 6 weeks. And all of us, our jaws just hit the ground. And she was like, I got this. Turned around and got him back in the next day or so. And that relationship with the town was really helpful for that. Our second phase turnover, she got all of our documentation in, and we were able to smooth through that. Also with inspections, having a third party, for example, for state licensure for health centers. In Texas, you have TDADs, or you had TDADs, now you have Health and Human Science or Services Commission. And we had Methodist Retirement engaged a consultant that started with the design, went through construction, and was able to identify some areas that were pretty big while we were through construction. Because what happens is they come out for licensure at the very end of the project when you have furniture in the ground or on the ground. And if they say that's not the right firewall or that window is too close to that opening, you got problems. So halfway through our Stevenson Oaks project, they identified a window that needed to be moved. And thank goodness, because otherwise we would have had a big problem at the end of the project. Utilities, and this is my last one. Utilities right now for not just water, sewer, and electricity, because those are big, and those are big milestones for your project, but franchise agreements. Your fiber, your telephone, your data, all of that. And Christy, I thought you were going to bring up the data for the turnover of Stevenson Oaks. But I mean, you've got to start these conversations early, and you've got to hold them accountable. They have to meet your deadlines. And they need to know your deadlines, and we need to have a contact there that is in charge of it all, and that's truthful. It'll tell us when they're going to be there. We actually started our conversation with a big name that I'm not going to mention, out on Stevenson Oaks a year before we even needed them. And we still didn't have all the infrastructure in when we started. It was thanks to the quick thinking of operations and the Methodist Retirement Community's IT department that got us there, that was able to make us functional. So we talked about the overall market. We talked about the efficiency of design and the new things that are coming up and what we're implementing now. These are unique times, but we're getting through it. You saw Bud's, one of his slides was all the projects that were going on right now, and they're thriving. We can do it together. And these are unique times, but like Bud said, these are not new challenge. I mean, we deal with challenges on every single project, and we get through it together. So find yourself a team that you trust, that helps you bob and weave, that can pivot. And when you get started, be prepared to be flexible, be nimble, be light on your feet, because it's going, and it's not going to stop. So we thank you for your time, and I think we're ready now for the next presentation.
Well done. Good job.
Are you ready?
Can you-
I got you.
No,
I got you.
it's all good.